the first thing I want to do is, do you all have particular questions that you want to talk about or to ask me tonight? Any questions about anything, any of the comments, or in putting your task together or anything like that? Okay. Well, I'm going to make this rather brief for more than one reason, but my daughter-in-law is in labor at the hospital, and this will be our very first grandchild. So I planned on making this 30 minutes when I thought the baby was due in November the 25th, but I was making it 30 minutes because of the fact that I had to work the election. But sometimes things happen differently and doctors have different opinions. So anyway, I wanted us to talk about your first assignment. That's the real reason I wanted us to meet tonight. The assignment for this week is for you to look at the information that is in there. And the example is, or the scenario is, in some interviews for school administrative positions, one of the questions that is often asked deals with marginal employees. Now, marginal employees do not have to be marginal teachers. It can be teacher assistants, it can be custodial staff, it can be anyone that works in your school. And when you're the principal, you're basically responsible for those people. And so the first thing you've got to think about is, what are you going to do? And I think most of the time, if we've hired someone, we want to give them the benefit of the doubt by helping them become better, so that they will no longer be marginal. So that's what this whole activity, this whole first scenario that you're to do this week is to deal with. So what I'd like for you to do as you're thinking about this scenario, you're the principal of this school and you've got these employees, maybe a licensed teacher, or maybe a bus driver, or maybe a teacher assistant, and they're just not doing their best. You think they could do a lot better, and you see things that worry you. You don't have a real basis legally to get rid of them because they're not doing that bad of a job. They're just marginal. So the questions that you're to think about and then come up with an answer during the week is, what steps would you take to offer support to the employees that you feel aren't meeting the standards that you desire for the employees in your school? Now, when you're thinking about a marginal teacher, the first thing that's going to come to your mind is what? What are you going to try to do with that teacher first to keep them from being marginal? What are you going to set up with them?
Are you talking about like an action plan?
Yes. Some, and I don't care what you call it. Some states call it action plans. Some call it professional development plans. You know, it doesn't matter, but your intent is to try to help them get better. So that's going to be one of the first things that you're going to come up with. Then, either before you do that or after that, you might want to assign them someone that is good at what they need to improve, who would work with them. You can call it a mentor, you can call it a fellow teacher or an employee, whatever, but it's where you're trying to help them and to encourage them. So, you know, what are the steps you're going to take to help this person get better? Then the next question is, suppose the options you gave a marginal teacher didn't improve the learning of the students, or the teacher didn't use the suggestions you provided. So then what are you going to do? You've given them help, you've provided them with suggestions. To put it in a different frame of mind, they think they know more than you do. So they choose not to do anything you tell them to do. Now you're looking at a whole different issue if the students aren't learning. And the question then becomes, are they really learning? Or is it a perception you have? And let me give you an example of that. There was a teacher in our school system And I was already at the central office as the superintendent at the time. And I kept hearing my support team, this was a new teacher, and I kept hearing my support team talk about that there was no discipline in the classroom, that she could never got their attention. But the strange thing was, at the end of the year, she had good scores. So either all those children were extremely smart and got it without ever having to pay attention to anybody, or there was more going on that we really did not figure out. And, you know, what she needed work on was classroom discipline. But for some strange reason, the kids were getting it. So do you have the proof that they're not getting it? Or is it just a feeling because what you're observing doesn't fit with what your opinion is? So you have to sort through all those things. And it almost becomes insubordination when they don't, when you say, I want you to try this, and they don't do it, then you're looking at something then totally different from just trying to help a marginal employee. You're also looking at, okay, is this bad enough to call it insubordination? And if it's insubordination, that takes you into a totally different way of looking at those employees. And then when is it that you're going to involve the district level human resource director? One of the things to think about when you get ready to dismiss, especially if it's an employee that's been there for a long time, and if it's a teacher, then you probably assume you're going to be challenged with trying to get rid of the teacher. Most teachers join some type of professional organization such as NCAE, or probably South Carolina has the same version of South Carolina Association of Educators, or there's professional educators in North Carolina. And it's very loosely organized, but the key to them is they provide you with a lawyer, and they provide you with someone that will help fight, especially if the teacher is sued by students over something. Well, I always encourage my teachers to join one of those organizations, knowing that those organizations are going to come back at me as a school administrator. So you have to figure out how to deal with that as well. And then the next question is, how would you deal with NCAE or PENC or any other teacher organization once the marginal teacher asks them to bring a representative to the meeting with you? The one thing to think about is don't let the representative intimidate you, but at the same time, don't say anything stupid. And I don't mean that in an ugly manner. Just don't say anything that can be used against you. You don't want someone taking a comment that you have made. And I've had this happen to me, where you made it trying to help someone, and then they turn it around. Well, you said this. Well, it was taken totally out of context, but you did say it. So then you have to figure out how to deal with those situations. And then the next question that you've got to think about and look up some information about is the process different for newly hired teachers under contract from tenured teachers? And you know it is somewhat different. So how is it different? It's a lot easier to get a newly hired teacher off of the career track and not in your school than it is to get a career teacher not employed in your school anymore. So you have to look back at the laws for your state and see what the laws are for it's usually the first 3 to 5 years. And then once whatever your state is, when they declare that a teacher's a career teacher, then that's when a different set of rules come in. So you have to look at that. And then the non-tenured staff, the ones who are not in a teaching role, they're not going to ever be tenured. And now in North Carolina, they've taken tenure out of the whole equation, and it's contracts. I think is what it is in most of the situations, unless you were there before the law came about for the contracts for teachers. But even the teacher assistants, there's certain things that you have to give information to the teacher assistants as to why you no longer need them. So, you know, look into your state and make sure that you know what it is that's being required. And I put down here, as you develop your answers, think in terms of the evaluation process, the professional development plans that you do with teachers, and any type of action plans if they're really, really bad. And you think it can be improved, you know, but break those steps down into something that can be easily handled. I would encourage you to talk with your school administrators that you trust about how they have come to work with marginal employees, and if there's been things that have worked well, you know, find out what they've done that they feel has been really, really successful, and then find out if there's been things that they've tried and they just didn't work. I've always been of the opinion that if something didn't work more than once, it's probably not going to work, so why should I try that again? Now, knowing also that different people react to different ways of instruction and dealing with each other. So that's another thing there. And then this is my notes to everybody. One thing you really have to remember is if you are thinking about dismissing an employee, unless there's going to be something through the law that they've broken a law, that they're going to be charged and it's going to be in the newspapers, you better have some documentation. And, you know, don't get caught in the situation where you have to keep someone hired when they're really a poor employee or they're very marginal because you didn't have good documentation. So just make sure that you look at all of that. I also know that you all have worked with teacher efficacy, and so I wanted to put together a little bit about what people are talking about when they talk about teacher efficacy. It's your teacher's confidence in their ability to promote student learning. That's just a simple definition of it, and that was Hoy's definition. And then the next little section on your agenda goes into how administrators can build teacher efficacy. And I'm not going to read that to you, but I want you to look at that because it may help you as you go into some of your other classes. You know, make your teachers true stakeholders. You know, read and, you know, think about that. How do you get teachers to buy in that it is their school and they are important and that they have a job to do with the students? So get your teachers to buy in and that they're true stakeholders. Praise. Share the good. Let them realize the good. And I think I've told you before that if your school is one that has been identified as low performing, the teachers are usually very down on themselves. I don't think I've ever met a teacher that made up their mind they wanted to go in the classroom and have their students do the poorest that they could possibly do. Everybody wants to do a good job, but it is often very hard to figure out how to do that with as many different kinds of students as you have. So don't ever forget to praise people and don't ever forget to share the good. It goes a lot further than people realize. And then what we've been working on this whole semester, collaborating and listening. And then when something is not going well and when it is bad, and acknowledge it. Say, okay, I know this isn't easy. This is a hard job. These are obstacles we're running into this year that we haven't done before. We haven't had these issues before. Our clientele is changing. Don't try to make teachers believe that it's not, that it's something that it's not. Be straightforward with them. And then when you can identify that there's probably several of your teachers that have some of the same needs, then that would be the principal's job to see that they got the professional development they needed. You can sometimes identify professional development that's needed in a school by looking at test scores. Sometimes you can identify it by when you visit in classrooms and you see some things that you think, oh gosh, these teachers are really weak on. It may be classroom management. It may be how to do cooperative learning. It may be how to do individualized teaching. So you can identify things in your school, and then you need to work to provide that for them. And so the next section is on what positively impacts teacher efficacy. And I'll let you look at those. And I failed to even pull up my agenda. I was running behind. But teachers who attribute student success to factors inside their control rather than factors outside their control, that will impact their ability to get students to learn. Holding multiple roles in the school helps a teacher feel better about themselves. And then when teachers learn and implement new practices, students often will benefit. And the real thing is when teachers get better, students get better. And when teachers come to think, know, understand, and practice differently in an area of student learning, their achievement is usually positively impacted. You also have a reading assignment this week on needs assessments. Now, you all had to do one, but it's some more information. It shows you from the beginning to the end how to complete a needs assessment. Something like what is an example, even though it's not in education particularly that the example is, it is the kind of thing that if you're working at the central office and you're asked to fill out a needs assessment for maybe Title I or some other area, it is the kind of thing that you have to fill out all of those parts. So I encourage you to pay attention to that. Some reminders: each of your tasks should be completed and you should be ready to put your document together for submission to turn it in. Refer to last week's agenda for how to put your document together. And some of the things that I have found in the documents, and when you put them together, sometimes you're getting part of task 4 and 5 mixed up, or sometimes you're I think it's just in the way it's transferred. Or maybe I made a comment about something that needed to be fixed and you fixed it in a different place and didn't get it in the right place. It's simple little fixes. The other one that I have had the most things that I've had to say about was task 5, where you've got to remember the 3 parts. It's not just one part of your internship. You've got to reflect on what you did in the class, what you did in developing the APSL, and then your internship. If you are behind, I want you to make sure that you're working hard to get caught up. We really only have about 4 weeks of this whole class left, and we're heading into Thanksgiving shortly thereafter. Now, I want to go back and look at what I left out, which is in your textbook. On page, in the school leadership textbook, we haven't used it this year, but it's on page 149, and it's an example about a new teacher. And so I know you haven't probably had time to read this because this is the first day of the class for this week. So I'm just going to quickly go over a few things in here. This is a new teacher, and what has happened, you had a very successful teacher, and then she's having to move. And so it's really disturbing, and you've got to find somebody to replace her. So the principal was sitting at his desk on Friday, and he had the schedule set. He had completed assignments. He had finalized his plan for the distribution of materials. And all of this happens, and his secretary comes in and says, "Mary Lou Watkins is on the phone and she wants to talk to you." And he immediately can tell from the expression on the secretary's face, yes, something's wrong. But the secretary says, "But you talk to her and she'll tell you herself." And so she says, "You know I love working at this school." And I also know you've done outstanding work. That's what the principal says. And then she says that she would have to quit immediately. Her husband's being offered a fantastic job. It's a distant state, and they would have to move in 2 weeks. So if you are the principal, this happens to you, what is it you've got to do? So, you know, one of the first things that you're going to have to do is talk with somebody in HR to find out what options you have. And I have actually had not exactly this same scenario, but I have had the opening of school in some years to the point that I actually said to one of my principals, all right, this is all that's out there. You've got these choices, or you can put a permanent sub in there until you can find somebody. That could be up to a half a year. What is it you want to do? You make up your mind. You're the principal. You decide. I'm not making that decision for you. Is it better to have a substitute who's not certified in anything, or is it better to have a certified teacher that has had difficulties in other places? Those are some of the kinds of things that you'll find you have to make decisions about. They are not easy decisions. They are very difficult decisions. So I want you to go ahead and read through that scenario, the rest of that whole scenario. And then on 151, these are the questions that I want you to look at. What else could Barney do at this late date to locate a more satisfactory teacher? What could he do to help the newly assigned teacher? And what long-term plans could be set up in order for Lola to become a master teacher? So it goes right along with the marginal employees assignment that you've got. And then I want you to look at the comments that this author provides for you. And he says, Barney could have called his colleagues to see if any of them had laid off any teachers due to lower enrollment that would be good for him. And he could have asked his secretary to bring the file with names of people. So there's a lot of things in different ways to look at. He could have called HR. So those are things I want you to look at, and I want you to read that. It's three pages, maybe 5 pages at most, 1, 2, 4 pages. Look at that as you're thinking about the marginal employees. So that's what I wanted to cover with you. Do you have any questions for me?
Dr. Todd, I have a question, and you might have answered this in the beginning if there were any. Dr. Bullis had mentioned about putting the task before putting our responses. When we're putting it all together, should we include those or not? Someone had asked that in another question, in another email.
Are you talking about the descriptions?
Yes, ma'am.
I think you're fine to leave it off as long as you label it task something another. And the turn it in of those, for those who have finished, your turn it in is 12, 15, 17%. That is phenomenally good. So that means, and most of those don't have all those descriptions in there. So I think you can do it either way, but I think it is fine to leave them out as long as you label them and put your subheadings in. Okay? All right, anybody else have a question? Any other question? Okay. If you don't have any other question, I'm going to, I did tell you it was going to be short. It's a little shorter than I thought it would be. I thought it'd be 30 minutes. We're at what, 23 or something. But if you don't have any questions and I've covered what I wanted to cover, then I will stop the recording, and I look forward to seeing the work that you've got. The stuff you're doing is very good work. So, the suggestions I make are not meant to make you feel bad about what you've done. You've done really good work, all of you have. But I'm just trying to make it, to find anything that the evaluators might find so we can fix it before it gets to them. And that's what I want you to realize. And that's also the way I hope that you all look at, if you're going to be a principal, you're trying to help your teachers get better rather than catch them in something. All right, any other questions? And thank you for being so accommodating that we could meet tonight this late. I appreciate it. We'll be back on our regular schedule next week.
Congratulations on your new grandbaby. Hope all goes well.
I just hope it all goes well. Just keep them in your prayers. It has been a very difficult up and down kind of thing for them the whole time, and this is not going any better. So thank you. Y'all have a good rest of the night, what little is left. Good night.